hear me now? Okay, we have questions. We've had some provocative presentations here. Questions from y'all. What do you think? Yes, Susan.
I have both a comment and a question. You kind of touched this in your presentation. Many times there are policies, be they governmental policies or agency policies, that prevent us from doing exactly what you're saying we should be doing. How do we get around that?
I'm glad we have 3 more hours to discuss that. I mean, my answer to this is to reemphasize kind of the ultimate value of kind of experimentation, which does incorporate research, but is not exclusive to research within the human services. And I think there's this underlying tension between thinking about funding and then thinking about feasibility that I think is a false choice. We do lots of stuff in the human services. Whether or not all of it is required by funders is an open question. I'm not talking about guerrilla research, G-U-E-R-I-L-L-A. I'm talking about there are spaces for research that we can explore, create, and experience if we're comfortable thinking about the value of incorporating research into our daily practice. Take a look at the paper. In particular, take a look at Figure 3 if you might be interested. About one possible schematic and one possible visual understanding of how we developmentally think about how to incorporate research into everything we do in an organizational setting, regardless of whether it's funded or not. So I think, and not to belabor this, I think we should have time for other questions, but I would challenge all of us to think about, both from our own positionality as practitioners and researchers, and the organizations in which we inhabit, now, in the future, and the past, is the research that we do only the research that we do? Or are there opportunities for research that we haven't explored that possibly could exist if we're interested in thinking creatively about incorporating research into practice?
Other questions? Okay, so I'm going to pick up on his last statement and ask y'all, how many of you is there someone here who sees an opportunity for research in your organization that doesn't necessarily require funding or structure? Okay, will someone want to give an example?
Well, I'm not sure what all you mean by funding or structure, but I work in wellness here on campus, and we're in the Division of Student Affairs. There's now more of a culture of assessment that's kind of new, and which we've been doing for about 7 years, and now we're a shining star, which we weren't before. But we just completed a research protocol, our alcohol program. We do that. We're about to start doing something because it's mandated by the state that we do some things with sexual assault and domestic violence and stalking. And we would love to be your guinea pig. If you would like to come over, I'd just like to tell you how to find you, so that you can do the statistical analyses that I at this moment do not care about. It's kind of easier than it was back in 1910 when I learned it. But I think that there are a lot of opportunities. And if you were to get funding, that would be great. But if not, we'll be glad to give you our data and have you run it for us, or come work with us, or help us design it. The thing I wanted to comment on before, which is kind of related, we now have to turn in a report that's eventually going to the Vice Chancellor, that's going to the President about our utility. And the last question was, how could other places within the organization change that would impact you? And one of the things that I said is that if we could change the little research practice silos that are so present just on this campus, forget the community. I find researchers across this campus in different departments and you don't know what each other are doing, much less what we're doing or how we could partner. Be nice to get out of those. So I guess I said more than I was supposed to.
Okay, here's someone here.
I guess I want to
Just
say,
wait for the mic so everybody can benefit.
I guess I have a comment and a question at the same time. In that I don't really find it as an administrator or as a practitioner difficult to do organizational-based research. I think for me, from my perspective, from where I come from, one of the responsibilities of a leader in an organization is to find the ways in which you transverse those challenges that you identified in all those boxes. And so for me, I spend a lot of time thinking about the people that we serve and how we serve them, the information that we need to have, and then how do I help my line staff, the social workers that I work with, or the students that I work with, how do I help them become what I like to call creative, critical thinkers? See, for me, research isn't just data points. It's all sorts of information that we take in all day long, and so how do I teach or how do I mentor my folks to be able to think in that way as we move forward in this very complex world? So for me, what you're talking about is, I don't see it as a horrible challenge. I think the real gap that we have in research to practice is how do we connect the organization. I hope you talk about that. How do we connect the organization and the academic researcher so that we all work together to create this sort of critical, creative thinking process that really moves the ways in which we work with clients forward. So I guess that's what I want to say. I don't see it as a challenge so much as...
Bowen, and then I'd like to ask the two of you to respond also.
My response is really quick. I'll look forward to us having a chance to chat after this, and for us to maybe get a chance to work together in the I guess the breakout room, maybe tomorrow on this issue. Because I think it does come at this word of homophily and kind of cross-cultural dialogue, and I think there are also, as we've alluded to in many of our presentations, kind of different cultures and different incentive structures and different language, all of which we may either intentionally or unwittingly use to promote distance when there should be simpatico. So I think that's an entree into that conversation that I'd be glad to have with all of us or some of us.
Would either of you care to respond also?
I'm pretty fried at the end of the day. I don't know how you guys are, but I think that one of the things I'm liking about this is this sense of polyocularity. How's that for a word? Polyocularity. And that is that we're coming from such different perspectives that we can shine different lights on the problem and see it from a different way. If you only have one eye, you see in 2 dimensions. If you have 2 eyes, you see in 3 dimensions. And the more eyes you bring on it, the more dimensions of the problem you can see. And we begin to understand what this linkage issue is.
More questions? Yes.
It's really a comment, but I think there's a question in there somewhere. You know, my brain was already hurting thinking about the complexities of what we've been talking about today. You know, we talk often about adapting an intervention, and we begin to talk more and more about adapting the interventioner. You know, which in our case is the practitioner, the person delivering the intervention. And I think what Bowen's paper is really very provocatively talking about is that we also have to adapt the organization. And so, you know, as if it wasn't complicated enough to think about adapting the intervention and adapting the interventioner, now we think about adapting the organization as well. And I'm loving it, by the way. I love that things are complex. If human beings were simple and boring, I'd be programming computers and not doing the kind of work that I do. But it does stretch the brain a little bit to think about how to accomplish that. And I wonder if you can comment a little bit about how those 3 levels of adaptation can intertwine.
I'm sorry, I was thinking about Shinerbach. Because it's 5 o'clock somewhere. All right, so check this out. Not to be banal or boring or simplistic, but an ESI/EST, whatever you want to call it, it's an organizational intervention, right? Anytime you put so much effort into getting something so precisely tailored to suit either a curriculum-based model or any other model, and incorporated in that is a very specific, or we would hope, theory of change or theories of change at multiple levels, right? You're proposing an organizational intervention that should be expected to influence and be influenced by both the meso-organizational environment, which we generally think of as programs within, and the macro-organizational environment, which includes the fiscal, policy, institutional factors that I'm alluding to in the PowerPoints as well as in our paper. So this is thick. I mean, this is serious. And at the same time, if you think about the colloquialism, the colloquial way we talk about ESIs and ESTs, it's like, yeah, this is what we did, and boy, did that stretch us. That's an example of it affected us. Or, here's another colloquialism. Boy, we couldn't do it the way we wanted to do it, right? We were having trouble thinking about adaptation in a way that made sense to us, that made sense to our consumer base, that made sense to our history as an organization. Yet at the same time, we're emboldened by this idea of a trend towards evidence-based practice, however defined, and so we're going to stick with this. I mean, I hear this all the time when working with different sorts of providers, be they individual, group, or organizational. That suggests that there's reciprocity here. This is a two-way street. This is a complex system that we are thinking about using tacit knowledge. We're thinking about this even though we're not knowing that we're thinking about this. All we need to do to take that next step is to begin to get on paper and to be able to visualize how we expect those linkages to look and what we expect to happen if we continue down this path. And that's a process of doing nothing more than simple mapping, drawing, and starting to think, not abstractly, but starting to think systematically about the ways in which we want to engage in terms of informing our practice. So be it through ESIs or ESTs or some other set of acronyms, we're expecting there to be organizational change. All we have to do now is start to pay more attention to what we're already thinking about. And there are mechanisms and techniques out there that are based in a different literature than the one we're talking about, but that are really founded upon organizational development, behavioral analysis at the organizational level, and probably 30 or 40 years of rich anthropological as well as more quantitative approaches to organizational analysis. So we do have some analytical tools and conceptual tools that we can draw upon. We just have to think creatively about how to draw on them.
Very well said. We are at the end of our time. Thank you to our speaker. Thank you to our responders. And all of us, thanks to our brains for figuring this out and being willing to move forward and accept the challenge that's been presented to us today.
Thank you very much. We'd like to give you all a gift and thank you for your time and all of your wonderful